polio, the United States has not seen wild polio since 1979 because of vaccine. Diphtheria used to be called the stalking agent, used to kill whole families in a week. We've almost never see it. Tetanus, we almost never see. Measles, we used to have 3 to 4 million cases in the United States. This is a really bad year for measles, which means we have 2,500 compared to that to 3 million. I mean, we're still better off, even in a really bad year. Smallpox in the 20th century alone killed 500 million people. The worst kind, so there are several types of smallpox. The worst kind has a 30% fatality rate. Some people are left with horrible scarring, some people are left with brain damage, some people are left with other disabilities. Horrible disease. No longer there. It's the virus has been eradicated. It's no longer anywhere in the world. It's the only human virus that's been eradicated. We are almost certainly going to have more outbreaks of preventable disease, more children getting diseases that will harm, maybe even kill them, than in the past because of these actions. Restructuring the schedule, and they're trying to downgrade 6 of the recommended vaccines into lower categories, less routine recommendations.
I want to start by kind of just debunking some of the common misconceptions or lies that obviously get kind of spread about vaccines. Obviously, with Trump and RFK, a lot of them are coming back. I think the biggest one is that vaccines somehow cause autism. Can you go into like the data, the research behind this, kind of why it's pretty definitively untrue?
So first of all, it's always fair to ask, do vaccine cause something? So in the 1990s, two things happened. One, they changed the diagnostic criteria for autism, expanding them dramatically with the very good goal of catching children that could use help but weren't getting it. And at the same time, questions were raised whether vaccines cause autism. And in the 1990s, they came in 2 flavors. It changed since, but then there were 2 questions. One, did the measles, mumps, rubella, the MMR vaccines cause autism? And the other, did the preservative then used in vaccine, thimerosal, which is a mercury-based preservative, cause autism? What we've learned since, so it's been a long time since the 1990s, we've had studies in millions, and they showed that the answer to this is no. Children who get MMR don't have higher rates of autism than children that don't. And we removed thimerosal from childhood vaccines generally, and rates of autism continued to rise. And here too, studies showed that children that got it were different than children that didn't. So that's question answered. And we also learned more about autism, and we've learned that autism generally starts in the womb. It's prenatal. It's a change in the brain structure before a baby is born. So vaccines don't have anything to do with that. The anti-vaccine movement tends not to give up on theories, and they change the argument for how vaccine cause autism, but they're still holding on to that connection. And understandably, parents of children with autism ask themselves, what's going on? Should I worry? And parents of other children ask themselves, should I worry that vaccines might cause autism? But the data we have is very strong from all around the world, from large groups of scientists, and it's consistently saying, no, there's no such link.
And that's true for any medicine. I mean, another one that's under fire from MAGA right now, Tylenol, obviously, even something as mundane as that, like could cause risk, but the adverse effects of not taking it and getting a sickness are often a lot higher. Another one that you often hear is, that vaccines don't get tested. RFK Jr. is always saying there's no double-blind studies, so we can't know, and all of this. Kind of just on, all vaccines in general. I'll ask you about like the COVID vaccine next. Just in vaccines in general, what is the testing? What are the phases they go through before they ever reach market to where any of us would use them?
So first of all, when completely new vaccine for a new disease comes forward, you have 3 phases of testing. You don't always go in order, so sometimes you overlap. The first is testing in a small number of healthy volunteers, and that is first to see if there are any really big problems, and second, to get the dosing right. So you take, let's say, 60 people, give them COVID vaccine in a dose of 50 units of the active material, 100 and 150, and see what happens, and you get the dosing right. Then that's called phase 1. In phase 2, you test the vaccine in several hundreds healthy volunteers, and there it's usually adult healthy volunteers. So if you have a vaccine for babies, eventually you need to test it in babies, but you start with adults to see how safe it is. And then phase three are kind of the determinative trials. These are large trials. For vaccine, they're anywhere from thousands to tens of thousands of people. And you take two groups, you give half of them the vaccine and half of them a control. What do anti-vaccine activists like to target the control of those trials? So a common control, so for example, the rotavirus vaccine, the control was take the vaccine solution, take out the active ingredient, the virus, but leave everything else. So by and large, the solution was mostly sugar water with some specks of other materials. Anti-vaccine activists say you should have just given sugar water. Why do they give the full solution? Because the other ingredients are in such low amount that they don't really make a difference. And for example, if you give a vaccine that has a little bit of aluminum salts in it, and then you give just saline water, not aluminum salts, so the local reaction is different. So vaccines are first tested in those three phases of clinical trial, the last of which are very big.
Mhm.
But even the biggest clinical trial is limited in two ways. One, if you have a adverse reaction that comes in 100,000 people or 1 million people, you won't see those in the trials. You won't see it until you give it to millions of people. And we want to know all the risks. The other is that clinical trials are of limited time because the more you wait, the later the vaccine comes to market and the more disease case. So at most, clinical trials are 3 to 4 years. What happens is the vaccine came to market and was licensed. We know enough to know it doesn't have very common serious risks. But then we continue studying the vaccine on the ground in millions of people to see if it has additional risks. So we keep learning about the vaccine because we all want really safe vaccines. So there's data from all around the world on that.
And I think it's really important to stress that even in the 1 in a million chance, that's far better odds than you get from what the vaccine is protecting against, where like the fatality rate is far lower than 1 in a million. On the COVID vaccine, because it came so quickly, it really was, I think, a
Good.
wonderful kind of like the medical apparatus globally coming together to bring this to market. But a lot of people are skeptical of that. It was too fast. They couldn't have done the testing. Can you kind of, and you went into a bit, but could you detail the testing it also went through before coming to market? Like it wasn't just, we'll give it to them and they'll be our guinea pigs and then we'll see.
That's an excellent question. So a few things helped us in the COVID vaccine, helped us get it more quickly to market. The first is that the COVID vaccines were new, but coronaviruses were not new. So in 2002, 2003, there was the first SARS. COVID is SARS-CoV-2, the second SARS. But we had the first one in 2002, 2003, and that was less contagious, but a lot more fatal. So scientists started researching coronaviruses then more seriously. Until then, people thought coronaviruses are just cold, they're not worth the time. We've also been researching mRNA vaccines for 20 or 30 years. So we had those two lines of studies that were put together and used to create the new vaccines. So we weren't starting from scratch. We were starting after 20 years of research. Then the other two things that helped us is first, the US government put in a lot of money. Usually, you have to have a pharmaceutical company put their own money on the line, and then they're careful. They don't want to put the money until they have good first results. When the US government put its money, it took some of that risk out. So companies were willing to go to trials quicker. They didn't skip the trials, but normally they wouldn't start the trials for 10 years until they did the research in small groups to make sure it's worth their money. These trials cost hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. So they don't go there until they are sure they can make it work. And also, the government put money into manufacturing. Normally, you get the trials, then you wait until there's licenses, then you create a factory and get ready to manufacture a lot of doses, and that takes another several months. So there's a lag. By putting in money, the US government cut those lags, so we got the vaccines faster. The other thing that helped us, ironically, is so normally, let's say you're making a meningococcal vaccine. You have to wait until you have enough cases in the clinical trial to compare the vaccine group and the control group. So if it's a rare disease or not very common, you don't give it enough cases for several years. COVID was raging through everybody.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of cases very fast. So all these things make the development time shorter, without having to cut safety corners.
And I want to get into kind of some of the stuff with the executive order and the childhood vaccine schedule. Before I do, because we spend a lot of time debunking the misconceptions and
Yes.
stuff. What are some of the benefits too that we've seen from vaccines when they became more accessible, whether it be from mandates, from just having people have more access to them? What are
Mhm.
the successes in bringing down the rates of disease, the fatality, that kind of thing that we can?
Great. So before vaccines, most diseases we vaccinate against have come down dramatically. Smallpox is kind of the biggest one, and smallpox is now gone. So smallpox in the 20th century alone killed 500 million people. The worst kind, so there are several types of smallpox. The worst kind has a 30% fatality rate. So 3 out of 10 people who get it die, and everybody else is left with something. Some people are left with horrible scarring. Some people are left with brain damage. Some people are left with other disabilities. Horrible disease. No longer there. It's the virus has been eradicated. It's no longer anywhere in the world. It's the only human virus that's been eradicated. Other diseases have been dramatically reduced. So polio, the United States has not seen wild polio since 1979 because of vaccine. Diphtheria used to be called the stalking agent, used to kill whole families in a week. We've almost never see it. Tetanus, we almost never see. Measles, we used to have 3 to 4 million cases in the United States. This is a really bad year for measles, which means we have 2,500 compared to that to 3 million. I mean, we're still better off even in a really bad year.
Yes.
So a lot of diseases have been reduced. Some haven't. So influenza, we still have 5 to 20% of the population get it because that's a harder virus to fight and less people get those vaccines.
Yeah, and I wonder why it's been such a bad year for measles. I wonder what it could be causing that. But yeah, onto kind of the Trump executive order. Before we get specifically into it, obviously it brings the childhood vaccine schedule kind of back into the conversation. So I want to start there before we get specifically into the executive order. Could you lay out the testing? We spoke about how vaccines are tested, but how is the schedule itself sort
Good.
of tested to say, not just the vaccines are safe, but they're safe together in this time period, that kind of thing?
Good. So the first thing I'll say is we talked about vaccine testing for individual vaccines, but since I think the 1950s, when a manufacturer brings a new vaccine to market, they have to perform as part of their testing what we call concomitant studies, which are studies of the vaccine with the rest of the schedule. They have to show that the vaccine doesn't make the schedule less safe. So we have decades of such study for each new vaccine, for polio and the rest. Um, we have a lot of data about each new vaccine, but that's not the main way the schedule is reviewed and overseen. First, we have the manufacturers make those concomitant studies for the vaccine with the rest of the vaccines. Then we have the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. That was created in 1964 under JFK, John F. Kennedy. And it's a committee of experts whose job is to review the vaccine schedule and make recommendation. The people on it are the best of the best, kind of the most, they include scientists that do virology or vaccine stuff. They include doctors that have tens of years of experience in clinical treatment of people. And it's kind of, I like to describe it as a geek's dream and everybody else's nightmare. It's 2 or 3 days of detailed meeting in which they discuss it, tons of data. Um, and usually they start following a new vaccine 2 years before it's licensed. And so when the vaccine is licensed, they're ready to go. They have the data. They look at the vaccine 3 times before they vote on it, usually in over a year. So they make decision based on a lot of data whether to add a specific vaccine. And in addition, they review the schedule again and again and again. Every year, they decide on changes to the schedule and review what's going on, look at safety studies and so forth. So that's how we have, again, decades of data following the schedule. We also have a few reports from the National Academy of Science, Medicine, and Engineering about the schedule. It's actually pretty old. It's from 2013 that looked at the schedule as a whole, and they found no concerns.
Yeah, and so then specifically on Trump's executive order, he aims to split up the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, and rubella into individual shots. It calls for vaccines in the schedule to kind of be done in like these one-off appointments rather than like together how the schedule kind of would have, like in the time period that it would have. And then it calls for more research into vaccines, again, as if they're not already extensively studied. What do you think of an executive order like this? Does it put
Mhm.
more people in danger? Like, what does it kind of do overall?
I think you're exactly going to the heart of it. This is an executive order that will create fear, uncertainty, and doubt and put people at unnecessary risk. So it has kind of four parts. The first part um, is essentially restructuring the schedule, and they're trying to downgrade six of the recommended vaccines into lower categories, less routine recommendations. So now it's legally that's not the way to do it. They have to go through ASIP, but it's going to confuse parents. They're going to look at it and say the government is saying that the hepatitis B vaccine, the hepatitis A vaccine, influenza, and COVID are no longer routinely recommended. Should I get those for my kids? And the result might be that parents will not get them for the kids, even though decades of data shows that the benefits outweigh the risk. They're also going to put pressure on states to recommend less of those vaccines. So that's also going to affect us. The second thing it does is, as you're saying, it says split the MMR. Notice that they're still recommending the MMR for everybody. There's a few problems with that. Problem number one, we don't have individual vaccines in the United States. The vaccines haven't been produced since the 1990s. Uh, the FDA, to license them, will have to either order new trials or accept really old trials. And for vaccines, you need to license both the vaccines and the building that produces it. There aren't any building in the United States that produces vaccines. So we don't have them. So how are you going to do that? And in the meantime, President Trump suggested to parents that MMR is not safe, which is not true. It's a very safe vaccine. So, what are parents going to do? We're in the middle of a large measles outbreak. Is this really the time to scare parents off MMR?
Yeah.
Not a good idea because the children are being put at risk of measles. And the third thing it's doing is it's saying, let's step away from aluminum adjuvants. The problem with that is that aluminum adjuvants are to make that change, you would need companies to actually make trials. And I don't think any company is going to go there because why would they? They don't have any incentives. And aluminum adjuvants are safe, but it's again going to scare parents.
It's also they're less levels than what's like naturally in your body, if I'm like correct, right? With the aluminum
You're
adjuvant.
exactly right. So the vaccines have small, not all vaccines. Some vaccines have small amounts of aluminum salts. Aluminum is the third most common mineral of Earth, which is where you're going. If we get a cut and get some soil into it, we got some aluminum into it. There's aluminum in our flour and in our food. There's aluminum in baby formula. There's aluminum in the air we breathe. We are exposed to it all the time in much larger amounts. The small amounts in vaccines are a speck.
Yeah.
They don't really make a difference for the aluminum uptake.
Yeah, and then I guess just and you're kind of getting into what my last question was for you, which is just overall with this, we have Trump and RFK doing away with some of these panels, the committees that you spoke to. Obviously, they're defunding research into these things. They're
Yes.
attacking it with executive orders like this. What does it say about the state of public health, our ability to respond to something like, obviously, God forbid, like another pandemic or something like that? Are we kind of in danger in a way because of this?
We are almost certainly going to have more outbreaks of preventable disease, more children getting diseases that will harm, maybe even kill them, than in the past because of these actions. We're also going to have a natural experiment of the wrong way, which is some states are going to feel pressure to follow Trump and RFK's lead, and some are going to go away. So some states will have less children protected than others, and we in 10 years we'll be able to look at the data and see, well, this state has a lot more hepatitis B and measles than this state that didn't follow Trump. And a I mean, nobody deserves to suffer and die because of anti-vaccine misinformation. The children in the states that are going to have lower rates don't deserve this. And B, I mean, I think we've talked about this before. There is no smoking section of this plane. on this plane.
Yep.
If some states have higher rates of measles, that's going to travel to everyone else and affect everybody. It's bad all around.